Merci. Alors,
Thank you. How to make the economy more human? Well, this morning we saw that there was an economic recovery, but not for everyone. The crisis has generated costs and jeopardized jobs, and there are major inequalities between the regions in the European Union. They're quite significant, and I've noted two statistics which struck me. The 40 percentage point gap between the employment rate in southern Italy and in a region in Finland. And the crisis affects young people more, so the lost generation, as well as the elderly and women. The Europe 2020 strategy, this offers a huge opportunity, but it seems to be sidelined and doomed to failure for various reasons, lack of economic recovery and the austerity measures introduced over recent years. And so Europe is no longer a factor of social cohesion. Indeed, sometimes it's perceived as being responsible for the decline in social rights. So to save Europe 2020 strategy, a number of things were put on the table this morning. Firstly, a democratic pillar, so involving citizens, because hitherto civil society has not been sufficiently involved and not in an adequate way. So we need an answer. But in terms of changing governance, I think it needs to be taken out of the hands of the technocrats. There are other players, and the strategy has to fully involve civil society. We didn't manage to draw the lessons of the failure of the Lisbon strategy, because even before the crisis, the democratic gulf widened. Economic integration benefited the richest countries with public policies basically constituted of fiscal and social dumping. In terms of solidarity, local solidarity initiatives, well, some have been introduced over the recent years and during the first years of the EU 2020 strategies, but those can't replace public policies, ensuring that we have inclusive public policies. So the institutions at a national and a European level have a fundamental role to play. Cohesion policies have to involve redistribution of wealth so that we have a common destiny for European citizens. We need an end to competition by the market based on a system which can respond to social justice and mutual respect amongst people. We need to promote access to common goods, so education, healthcare, security. European policies have to guarantee access in a fair way to these common goods, irrespective of people's economic means. So we need access to capital, step up the fight against tax havens, finally developing a social protection system, as well as minimum revenue, social protection, which is not a burden on labour, and it constitutes solidarity. So we supported the idea that we need to be paying attention to this idea. And finally, the European institutions have to support the social solidarity system as compared to other economic models, and just include the situation is urgent. The European Council will be meeting in a couple of days' time, focusing on the European semester and the EU 2020 strategy, and we hope that the recommendations and the information that's been provided today will be picked up on and listened to. European elections in 2 months' time. We're going to have to be able to respond to the deep social crisis and ensure that citizens once again have trust in the institutions. The best solution is solidarity between the member states, having a growth model which is based on linking social progress with economic performance. Thank you.
Much, Laura. Merci beaucoup. So now we're going to hear what the presidents and vice president present have to say about these first remarks. I would like to remind that we are going to be very strict on the time and that you have 2 minutes each of you to react. So I would like to ask Luca to be the first one to start for this round, and then we are going to switch a little bit the order afterwards.
Merci.
Thank you. There are two aspects of my training which are often criticized, both as a journalist and an economist. You can't get worse than that, anyway. A journalist and economist at the same time. Italian as well. Well, that might be a trump card because we've got some imagination and can overcome all those contradictions. Economists have a bad habit when asked for analysis to just say it's the economy, it's stupid. And, you know, there's no argument against it. You have to follow it. It's quite brutal. Now, the Queen of Great Britain asked her in 2009 for the opening of an academy in Oxford following the financial crisis, turned to academics and economists saying, well, what are we paying for? You weren't able to predict the crisis. Well, the economy is a science which explains afterwards, never before, what you have to do. Here we're in a case where for a long time now, we know what has to be done for Europe, especially in the economic area. We've known that for a long time. There are two things we know. Firstly, we've learned that a certain model that thought we could do without industry, it's not possible. We discovered that a bit late in the day, unfortunately. It was a certain ideology, which came indeed from the United Kingdom. And the argument was, you've got to work in a sector of high added value. They're from a financial sector or after-sales service and let people outside of Europe do the rest. But now we've discovered that if GDP, remember, 20% generated by manufacturing industry, but it's all important on the set. So industrial policy, energy policy, business policy, research policy, the internal market for services that generate good and sustainable growth. That was already in the Lisbon strategy in Europe 2020. It had just been forgotten. Now, it's true that we're running the risk of Europe 2020 failing, but we must remember that it's the first exercise that Europe has entered into in a bid to establish an overall economic policy for the continent as a whole. It needs to be improved, and I hope it will be. Policy viewed as a whole is balanced between the economic aspect, the generation of wealth, justice, fairness, and sustainability. These are the three axes of a Lisbon strategy. So the exercise I pursue now is to achieve this right balance from the economy is stupid and the figures on the debt. To balance that with future prospects. The crisis changed the starting position, but we need to work within the new context. Thank you.
The second group.
Bon, en ce qui concerne les économies.
Thank you. As regards economists, they're almost all, I wouldn't say all, but they're almost all. I mean, question mark on a very small percentage of them. Their profits after the event. I'm just wondering where they were, all those economists in 2008, in terms of predicting the financial crisis. And it was the poorest that paid for it. It wasn't the rich people who paid the cost of the crisis. It was the wage earners, self-employed people. So the lower categories of the population. So take what economists say with a pinch of salt. I think that in terms of the first rapporteur, that was a very good summary in a very short period of time. Talking about an economy for Europe rather than an economy for Europe, rather than a Europe for the economy. I would say what we need is an economy in the service of citizens. What we see is that there's not much point in investing in the real economy. I think where wealth is generated, well, if you want to generate wealth, people prefer to speculate. I think one of the proposals of the European Economic and Social Committee, and obviously not the only one saying this, but we have an official text, what we asked of the European Commission is to come forward with a proposal for taxation of financial transactions. Mr. Barroso's listened to us 3 years late. Well, better late than never. But we're still waiting for this to be implemented. ultimately, somebody say that this is what Europe is, Mr. Cameron. We can't accept that in the name of the sacrosanct place that the City of London has, we should allow the speculators to continue to get rich. Laura also talked about redistribution of wealth. This is fundamental. If we think that we're going to build Europe with a large percentage of the population living in poverty to a greater or lesser extent, we're wrong. So I think that is absolutely crucial that we move towards a better distribution of wealth because it's this European community which over decades ensured that there was a redistribution of wealth. There was talk of social justice. That's lacking, social justice. It's almost totally lacking. Nonetheless, I think it's here in this House that the Charter of Fundamental Human Rights started, as it were. It ultimately was culminated in the Asylum Declaration in Strasbourg between François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl. So we have the tools, but it seems that we don't want to make use of the tools that we have. It's also true what Laura was saying. In the minds of many people who are living in poverty, they have the impression that it's the EU that's the reason for the poverty they find themselves in. And I said this morning, we have to highlight the wonderful assets, advantages of the European Union and criticise what's not working in order that we can then improve that. Yes, I can see that the moderator is annoyed, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I am very sorry for cutting you off. It's not very polite of me, I know, but it is important that we stick to our time schedule. So could I ask Ms. Klasnich, I hope I've pronounced that correctly.
Thank you for the floor. And I do apologize. I'm not an economist or an economist who's have difficulty reading. Anyway, I'm in this group now, so I'd like to thank the young woman for telling us about her experiences between the economy and Europe. Well, I have a business background. I used to have a small company, and we always got a feeling that there was a dichotomy between the employee and the employer, but actually we're all in the same boat. In the EESC, NGOs, employers and employees take decisions together. And I think that would be a model which we could and should extend to other member states. In some member states, the situation could be improved. In some, it's working quite well already, but all the same, civil society could be incorporated even in those success stories to include their opinion. Now, health, education, human rights are all major topics, among others, in this group. And here, Laura, let me respond to you and say, I think the largest failing is this, and I was a politician for 35 years. I think the largest error is that people only start discussing issues shortly before the elections, because they think we've got elections coming up. No, we've got to start. No, that's wrong. The campaign for the next election starts the day after the last, so you have to consider issues all the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to the second workshop report, we have a couple more. Is this working? Yeah? No? No. So before we move on to the report of the second working group, we have a couple more quiz questions to introduce the topics. So if we go back one slide. Forwards. Okay. So, micro-enterprises. They're an important part of the economy in Europe. But what percentage of the EU workforce do they employ? We have three options. 12%, 29%, 53%. Who? We had some. Too many hands there.
3.
You're saying 3?
You're saying 3?
3 is the correct answer. 53% of the EU workforce.
Before you.
Can you do the
Yes.
honors with the gift? We have them prepared. Thank you. And for the quiz question connected with the second workshop, if we go on 2 slides. Okay. Giuseppe, as you know, is Secretary General of the European Youth Forum. And we've heard, I think all of us many times, how much more the EU spends on cows than they do on young people. But how much more do they spend on cows than they do on young people?
Yeah,
Giuseppe.
again, we have 3 options. One is 5.6 euro for 1 cow, for 3.2 for 1 young person, 12.7 per cow per 1.26 per young person, 25.4 euros per cow, and 10 euros 0.3 per young person. The data is referring to the past multi-annual financial framework. Number 2. He was faster. He was faster.
Okay.
Okay.
Well done.
Very well, very well. So let's then, with this reflection about how the economy basically and how the finances and the resources are actually used for the people, introduce the second topic of the second workshop, which was about a social Europe. Well, I wanted to ask to Mana, who is the rapporteur of this group, specifically one of the greatest challenge that I think all of you in all the workshops have actually been debated, but this one was particularly relevant for this subject, which is the gap between which is the expectation that Europe should do on social issues and what actually Europe can do within the realms of the current competencies that the Union has. So I guess that this was one of the elephants in the room in the discussions of the workshop.
Definitely. Thank you. The workshop aimed at answering 3 main questions. How to make it possible for the economic union to also have a social face. How to make the link between the measures at the European level, but also linking that to what the citizens want, so ergo the expectations, and how to go beyond wishful thinking and give concrete proposals for more rapid actions. Well, the expectations often meet a great disappointment when it comes to social Europe for citizens. In the context of crisis, of course, we discussed during the workshop that despite signs of economic recovery in some of the member states, most of them still face economic and social difficulties with direct impact in the lives of most European citizens. Increase of poverty, unprecedented levels of unemployment, increase of inequality and social division, but also we came back a couple of times on the discrepancies between European countries. Social injustice is not the same in Germany and in Cyprus today. Faced to that, there is also a disappointment towards the ambiguous, what was called the ambiguous European strategy. That was while they were taking, the EU was taking austerity measures to deal with the crisis. The consensus to build a social economy has been forgotten. And despite the talks for social improvement measures, the fundamental social rights in the treaties are not adequate when it comes to facing the crisis, or despite the launch of the European 2020 strategy, it doesn't really answer what is needed to reinforce the social dimension of the European Monetary Union. So this led for some in the workshop to a general loss of confidence in the European project, of course also to national leaders, but greatly in the European project. So before answering what EU can do or EU should do, it was also mentioned what the citizens actually want when it comes to social Europe. Well, people want employment, better living conditions, purchasing power, of course. They have been disappointed often by the European measures that have sometimes been seen as going in the opposite direction, but they also realize now more and more that that the answer comes from Europe. They can be opposed, they can be disappointed, they can be angry, but they also now agree and come to the realization that the EU is the level that has to go through deeper reforms to reach social justice and answer the equal opportunity. So what the EU can do today for a social Europe for citizens, the crisis has reminded us that beyond the economy, Europe is also a union of values, and that we need to turn these values into policy making to find the political will to strengthen the social Europe Union, to bring the principle of solidarity at the core of the European project, to use the calendar and put Europe back in the debates, especially now that we are soon having the European elections, and also fight national prejudices and communicate on the ground. There were many examples. I want to come to maybe two in fighting the national prejudices, how to address also it comes to the local powers, local leaders, local civil society organizations, also to emphasize that European policy making is not just a summit every couple of months, that we are dependent on each other and have a lot of common potentials, and also that we have to address the mass media, giving examples to day-to-day life and maybe going out of giving complex financial glossaries when it comes to giving faces to figures for the crisis. And also, I mean, when what the EU can do, we should talk about money. We were comparing the cows and the young Europeans. The European Union has invested 800 billion to save the banks and 6 billion to support European youth. So this is what EU level can do, but what they should do, we also discussed the strategies for the civil society to convey their messages, ensure minimum engagement of civil society at the national level, local level, would empower them to give input to policy designs. There were some examples also given of initiatives on organizing cross-partisan approaches and meetings to think about the future of Europe, to approach, again, European Parliament candidates to communicate on the grassroots level. The occasion of the elections is I mean, the momentum to use. Civil society as also organizations and structures that can bridge the gap for citizens to access the information on their rights. And finally, we came to a list of proposals under the headline 5 years to save the Union. You might have seen the presentation. 5 years to save the Union. Concrete proposals, bring cohesion back, universal and equal access to social services, education, healthcare, social security system, access to justice, equal opportunity for employment, not only access to labor market, but also possibility for personal development, stronger workers' rights. We have discussed in the past the debate on European minimum income level. They would like to reintroduce this debate, but also more broadly about income schemes and pensions debates. To discuss, again, put on the table the freedom of movement, not only to create fair labor market, to strengthen mobility, but also to overcome economic obstacles and administrative hurdles. Also to respect the fundamental rights for everyone living in Europe, including the migrants. Finally, invest in youth. It was discussed also in the first workshop. Talking about money, talking about the youth guarantee, to have sufficient budgets to ensure that the measure will actually deliver, and invest in culture and education, well, the future of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mana. So now the same format as before. The two presidents and the vice presidents of the groups here in the EESC will have a couple of minutes to respond to those. And this time I'd like to invite Ms. Klasnich to start.
Danke.
Thank you. Well, if you meant that faith has to be restored, and that better living conditions, employment, that all that are important issues, well, yes, I agree. We need a proper balance to ensure that education is possible in all member states and in all places, and not just for certain people, and also access to healthcare. Yes, these are all essential features. You also spoke about young people. And let me add that we have a population pyramid. The people are getting older and older. That is an important topic for the future. And on this question, I'm not having the best time at the moment. So, the question of gender equality, we do know that women need particular support in certain areas, but I wanted to focus on one area. You mentioned the media. Perhaps in time we might see the media being able to send positive messages out of what we do in Europe on occasion, and not just pass on the simplistic message that home equals good and Brussels equals bad. I hope you'll excuse my lack of voice.
Thank you very much. And George?
Merci.
Thank you. Congratulations again for that summing up. If I may, I'd like to add one thing. Cows and young people, that was a good example. Mr. Barroso, in this self-same room, announced to us that he'd earmarked 6 billion for 7 years. 7 years. And we said to Mr. Barroso, President, you think that amount of money will find enough jobs for 500,000 young people? According to Eurostat at the time, the number of unemployed young people was 5 million. So I said, well, give me more money and I'll do more. And we've been told that to absorb in a significant way unemployment, especially unemployment amongst young people, you'd have to invest 21 billion per year. And then they say, well, we don't have that money, I'm sorry. But, you know, my view is if you want to find money, you can. The 800 billion were mentioned just now, which have been used to get banks back afloat. And European citizens were taxed to find the money to pay to save the banks. Now, with Mrs. Glusnik, a trade union in her company, I'm sure we get on well. That's not the first time I said that. We in the trade union movement, we of course defend those who are in work, employees, but we are aware of the fact that no progress can be made without having businesses that respect working conditions and standards. Businesses that respect men and women. Unfortunately, I'll leave it at that. The argument you keep on hearing is that you need growth so people don't starve. Well, no, it's not right, actually, I say. When productivity increases so much, as it has done over recent years, where are the benefits? Who has earned all this money that can be invested today to ease the pain felt by many citizens? So it's time to stop arguing just in terms of growth and to say that when there's no growth, well, social Europe is there to look after those who are in need and in misery.
Very much. Our apologies for the technical difficulties. I think it's just with the interpretation into English. We're trying to get it fixed. So thank you for your patience while we try to fix it. But in the meantime, Luca.
Oui, quelques petits.
Yes, just a few thoughts. Firstly, I think that the figures mentioned at the start, 13 euros per cow against 1.2 per young person, maybe those figures have started to change with the new budget, the new multi-annual financial framework. Maybe we've reduced somewhat the spending on cows and started to set something aside for young people, even if it's not enough. It's less than what Georges was calling for in terms of what we need. And we also need to remember that 6 billion funding for the youth guarantee, yes, but we had an overall reduction in the European Social Fund of 15 billion. And if we consider what Commissioner Andor had answered in order to face up to what's needed, well, I mean, it was still a negative balance, but we're starting to address that. Secondly, we need to recall that the European agricultural policy was one of the biggest successes of the European Union in terms of guaranteeing European food security, in terms of production and contribution to European wealth, and in terms of regional and social cohesion. So it's true that maybe we've given too much to cows and not enough to others, but it's also true that in that context, we have struck that balance that we've been talking about hitherto. So we've supported transition, we have supported business, and also supported cohesion. So we have struck that balance. Secondly, in terms of the great report from our rapporteur, I'd just like to recall that if I'm not mistaken, but we do have experts on the treaty here, they know all the details, but about 50% of the provisions in all of the Lisbon Treaty relate to the social dimension. When we talk about the social dimension of European policies, of the EU or Monetary Union, we're talking about 50% of the treaty, not just what's in the protocols, the annexes. We're talking about 50% of the provisions of the treaty, the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So we have to go back to the treaty and the balance that's in there. We have to try and strike that balance that's in the treaty. Third point, and I'll conclude on this, the need to ensure that in all policies and economic actions, the real economy is at the centre of all those. I remember that right at the start of the crisis, it was autumn 2008, I was invited to a conference at the Bernardin College in Paris. So it was a debate. I was representing civil society, and there was the director of Danone, a big multinational company, and saying, well, Danone produces yogurts, dairy products, cheese. So in terms of production of yogurt, dairy products, what profits can we generate from that percent? My shareholders want a return of 15 to 18% on their investment. So what do? I take the 40% of the money from the shareholders and I put it, I speculate with it. On the financial markets, that's for Danone, it was positive. But for Parmalat in Italy, it was a disaster. It went to the wall. So the real question that we haven't addressed was that a significant share of the economy is put to the service of the production of wealth, paper wealth, not for the real economy, neither businesses, families, workers, or citizens, or poor people, or elderly people, or others. And I think that we have to put their concerns at the heart of things. And if we do that, I think there'll be much more possibility for alliances between producers and citizens as compared to what we see currently. Separation between business and workers, because that's the reality. We're all consumers and we're all interested in improving working conditions, living conditions. We all have children. We all know elderly people who have health problems. So we're all a part of that and we have to work together. So ensure that better living conditions are placed at the centre of policies. I think that's the key for once again striking the balance, which, as I say, is the balance that you can find in the treaty. It's clear, and we have to start to respect it more.
Luca, for that analysis, and now going through the last theme of the workshops, which was related to citizenship and related governance issue within the EU, and having discussed the issue of the rights of citizens, I think that you've been also discussing quite a lot about the treaties, and I've been hearing the word constitution several times in different rooms during the day. And definitely it could be interesting to know, and this is the last question, so the last opportunity for you to win. No, there is still another one. It's the one before the last before the last one. Opportunity for you to win a pot of honey, which is actually about how many articles there are in the Lisbon Treaty. It was the first one. Very straightforward. Congratulations.
Somebody's there or not?
I'm going to bring it.
Honey is finished.
The honey will go there. So I'd like to hand over now to Julia, last but not least, the rapporteur from the third working group. And there you were speaking about the tools that are available for civil society to influence policy making. But maybe you can tell us something about the limitations of those tools and what can civil society do and what can all stakeholders do to improve the possibility for civil society to influence policy making.
Merci. Alors,
Thank you. Well, in workshop 3, we started with the fact that exercising active citizenship can only work within a participatory democracy. So it leads us to the next question. How can we build this in Europe? Now, during the European elections, the idea is to involve citizens in a European dialogue, but also to consider how we can change the way in which institutions in Europe work so that we can take better into account the demands of civil society. Mr. Pinto presented to us the conclusions of the Alliance for New European Citizens and the 3 pillars for proper democratic function. The first was citizenship pillar, and for that to work properly, we need good quality education, training, access to it. Citizens need to know what their rights are. And there are a number of tools which are made available to them so they can participate properly in European dialogue. Then there's a question of the role played by the media. And that was explained as being central to this. And in particular, the question of access to training in Europe in all the different languages. Secondly, on the European institutions, sometimes, unfortunately, give the impression of not listening to or reacting to citizen participation, and that makes citizens reluctant to enter into rather complex procedures which need to have their voice heard. The example of the European Council, for example, that takes its decisions in a closed chamber was also mentioned during the session. The third pillar is that of civil society, which has to act as a guarantor of a dialogue between citizens and institutions. The organizations of civil society need to be clearly recognized as active partners in the decision-making process in Europe. And it has to be regretted that there's been a fall in the European budget allocated to these organizations. Many tools have been proposed by the European institutions themselves, but they're complex. That's been debated at some length during the workshop. The main challenge, therefore, is to make all these existing tools clearer and simpler so that citizens can participate more easily. Indeed, often citizens don't know who to turn to, nor how to participate actively in European decision-making processes. It seems, therefore, necessary to involve citizens in key European issues, for example, such as the European budget and how it's used. We talked a lot about the Citizens' Initiative as a tool. That should enable citizens to participate more in the decision-making processes in Europe. This is a tool which was introduced by the Commission in partnership with the European Alliance for Citizens, but it does show the need to deploy considerable resources if the citizen initiative is going to work, which means that associations or organizations have to be pretty big before they can use this tool. We talked a lot about just how bureaucratic Europe is and we need to reform that so that organizations of civil society can participate more easily, however big or small they are. Then there was a question of European competences and national competences and how that fits together. It's a bit of a puzzle for many people, especially when it comes to knowing who to address. Civil society, therefore, needs to play not just a role as mediator with citizens and institutions, but it has to be present at European and national levels at the same time. So this requires some reform if participatory democracy is to work well. This might require reform of the European treaties themselves. But above all, it needs a great political will if that's to be achieved. The three pillars mean that citizens and institutions need to work together as partners if to guarantee true participatory democracy, and we need to make progress on the existing tools for citizen participation. The best players and actors are citizens themselves, and they're becoming more and more organised to participate in European decision-making. So it is necessary to strengthen those tools which are already at their disposal so that a structured European dialogue can continue in an effective way. So it should not be a question anymore of how legitimate civil society organisations or European institutions are, but rather how can they work together so they can continue to guarantee a European dialogue. Thank you.